G'day everyone, welcome back to the vlog. It is currently about 7 a.m. on a Wednesday morning here in Melbourne. I woke up about an hour and a half ago, cooked myself some breakfast, salmon with rice and veggies. Absolutely banging breakfast, so delicious. So I had a shower and now I'm fully fed and showered. What's next? Straight into these poker hands. The goal for today is 1,500 hands of online 9-handed games. As always, looking to play that A-grade level of play as well. One very specific thing I want to focus on in this session is using a bit more aggression when I do have a range advantage on a certain board texture in heads-up pots specifically. Don't want to get too overly aggressive in multi-way pots, but just in those heads-up pots, more specifically looking for good opportunities to bluff my opponent or bet for thin value, just trying to avoid being too passive, but also not overdoing the aggression either, which is probably pretty good in these passive games. So I don't have much more time to waste. Let's get into the poker hands. Okay, it is about 5:15 in the afternoon at the moment, and I've just wrapped up my second poker session for the day. As you can see, it's a bit of good news, bad news type situation. The good news is I was able to play a total of 1,524 hands across both of the sessions today, so that's the good news. Now, onto the bad news. You can probably already see it on the screen there. I did lose a total of 608 across today's session, which, yeah, pretty significant loss. I didn't run the best over the course of today's session, but when it comes to how I actually played today, I've got 7 major hand histories, which I think really do tell the story of how I played today. So, without any further ado, let's get into the analysis. First hand up, we have Queen Jack of Hearts in the +2 position. I go ahead and open it up to 3. Then the low jack 3 bets us to 9.5. When the action's back on me here, this is one of those spots I don't really mind doing any 3 of the options we have. I ultimately do decide to call though. I think maybe, the fact that we're out of position and that they did go bigger than 3x and they only started with 100 big blinds, folding might be a bit better, but with a hand as strong as Queen Jack, you can't go too bad by continuing and seeing a flop, which we do. The flop is Ace Queen 4 Rainbow. We do have a backdoor hearts. Definitely going to go ahead and check it over to the pre-flop aggressor though. They do throw in a C-bet. They go ahead and bet half pot. The action's back on me here, and I think it's a pretty easy decision for me to call on this street. Not only do I have some showdown value with my Queen High, but even if my opponent does have one of the stronger hands in their range, like an Ace King, we do have a lot of outs to improve to 2-pair or a backdoor flush draw. So I do go ahead and throw in the call. We heads up to the turn, which is the 8 of spades. I go ahead and check it over to the villain, and then they check back. So once they do check back, I'm feeling a bit more confident about the strength of my hand. I don't want to get too carried away though, because they definitely do have hands that we beat in their range. They could have Queen 10 suited, they could have pocket jacks, pocket 10s, but they also could have an ace, ace king, ace jack, or pocket kings, all of which we lose to. So a bit more confident about the strength of my hand, not super confident at the same time. We go to a river, it's a 5 of hearts, the action's on me here. Because of everything I said about my opponent's range, definitely going to go ahead and check it to them and see what they do. They go ahead and bet 15, so a pretty small bet here. We are getting a pretty good price to call on this bet, but I actually really don't like calling here, and that's because I think a lot of the hands that I mentioned are in my opponent's range are going to choose this size to value bet with. Like if they do have pocket kings, they might just be trying to eke a bit of value out of us. If we do have a queen, or they definitely could have, checked the turn with a weaker ace, being worried that, I could have ace queen in my range, I could have ace 4 suited, I could have pocket 4s, there are a lot of strong hands in my range, and they might not have wanted to be raised on the turn, so that's why they check the turn back. Now they're just trying to eke out a little bit of thin value. So I think folding is 100% a legitimate option because of that, but with everything I just said in mind, I actually think the best option here is to actually go ahead and raise as a bluff. Just because imagine you're the villain here and you have ace king, you put out this tiny protection bet on the river, and then your opponent goes ahead and rips it all in. That is an absolute nightmare spot. It's going to be so hard for them to call off, and I was in the zone during the game and I put it in. I bluffed, raised, all in, putting max pressure on my opponent's range of hands that I think are mostly just thin value bets, and then they go ahead and fold. So that's a beautiful start to the session. We get a massive bluff raise through on the river. Super curious to hear what you guys think about the bluff raise. Is it a bit spewy? Do you think opponents are going to be inclined to call off an ace there? Super keen to hear what you guys think, but I'm actually pretty happy with this, and I'm glad I went with my read, at least in terms of results, because clearly it worked out here. The next hand's a bit of a quicker one, but I really do think it starts to tell the story of where my head was at during the course of this session. So we get a +2 open to 3, then there's a cold caller in the cutoff. The action falls to me in the big blind with ace-king. You can see it there. Obviously going to go ahead and 3-bet here to 15. Then I get a call from the +2 position and the cutoff falls. We're heads up to a flop and it is queen 8-8. The action's on me here, and I really do think I have a lot of options on this board. I think betting out a small bet can make sense on this board. I'm going to have a lot of strong hands here. I can have ace-queen, I can have overpairs. A lot of those hands are probably going to want to bet a bit smaller on a board that is this dry. Having said that though, I think checking is also a very legitimate option, just because I do have a lot of showdown value, and if I go ahead and check it over, it gives my opponent an option to bluff, and then I can check call, whereas if I lead out myself, they're not going to have the opportunity to do that. I start to get a bit too aggressive in this spot though, and I do decide to bet out. If I'm going to bet out here, I do like using a 1/3 pot bet size, but I think checking is probably the better option. Regardless though, I lead out, and then my opponent does call. So we're still heads up to the turn. The turn is the jack of spades. Now the action's back on me here, and my thinking at the time was I just picked up some equity. You know, I can make a straight on a 10, I can make the best pair on an ace or a king, and I do decide to go ahead and keep bluffing. I bet 22. I think there is some merit to this decision, but I think I am being a bit too overly aggressive. My opponent definitely has a lot of queens in their range. They're actually going to have more eights in their range than us, which not only means that's something I have to be concerned of here, but they can actually bluff raise us pretty often to try and represent an 8 if they're a savvy player and they understand that's what the dynamics are. So I really don't think this is a good spot for me to keep going at it. But like I said, I was in a bit too aggressive a mindset trying to win pots, and so I kept betting. And then the opponent goes ahead and they do fold. So considering everything I said, it did pay off for us and we did get a bluff through, but I think it's sort of where the session starts to sort of plant the seeds of a bit of over-aggression. We'll get into the next hand and you might see what I mean. The action is on me under the gun with 10-9 of clubs, and I already think this is a pretty interesting decision pre-flop whether to raise it up or fold. In a 9-handed game, you really don't want to be raising in early position that often, just because the chances you have to play the pot out of position is so likely. So for that reason, I like folding 10-9 suited pre-flop, but it can be good to have some suited connectors in your early position raising range, just so you have better board coverage. So I really don't mind using either option. The reason I don't like opening it in this spot is just because I was being too overly aggressive in the hands today, and I think my mindset was just more so on aggression than it was actually good proper strategy. So I mean, I did raise it under the gun. I mean, come on, the hand wouldn't have made the vlog if I didn't raise it pre-flop, but I do think my reasons for raising it probably weren't the right reasons to be raising. Regardless though, I open it up, get a cold call from the cutoff, and we go heads up to a flop. The flop is ace-queen 5, so we do flop a flush draw. I definitely want to go ahead and bet on this board. I can easily represent ace-king, ace-queen, ace-jack, and all of the pocket pairs that my opponent calls with pre-flop, which is pretty much everything through pocket 2s to pocket 10s probably, with the exception of pocket 5s. They're all going to be put in a tough spot when I bet. So I go ahead and bet 3, and then they do call. So we see the turn, it's queen of hearts. The action's on me here, and I think this is a pretty interesting spot. We could continue semi-bluffing, trying to represent a strong ace, but I think on this turn is kind of more dicey. Like if we did have an ace-jack or an ace-10, we might still bet, but we would have to be a bit more cautious just because the opponent, they're going to have a lot of queens in their range. They're going to cold call with king-queen, queen-jack, queen-10 pre-flop. So this might be a bit of a scare card for us. We would check an ace sometimes, which means if we do decide to go aggressive with bluffs here, it's not quite as believable. You know, double barreling, it's not the worst here, particularly with one that a good semi-bluffing hand like 10-9, but I think I didn't decide between those two options for like the right reason. I just took the more aggressive line. I did go ahead and mix in the second barrel, which I don't think is a huge mistake, but I do think my bias this session was towards over-aggression, which is sort of explaining why I've taken the aggressive line every street. during this hand. And the opponent calls, so not in love with that, but we do get to see a river, which is the king of clubs, so beautiful river for us. He actions on me. Now I definitely want to go ahead and bet for value. I really don't want to go that big because I think an ace might be scared off, so I'll just go ahead and bet 13, trying to give an ace a good price to call. If my opponent has ace jack, ace 10, then my opponent does throw in the call, so we're loving that until we see that our opponent actually has king queen, and they river to full house. Somehow we didn't get raised on the river. It would have been an awkward spot if we did get raised, whether I call off or not, but I mean, even though I didn't like my approach pre-flop and on the turn, I did run pretty well to not get raised in this spot. Next hand, I have ace king on the button. I go ahead and open it up to 3. Then a tight aggressive big blind goes ahead and 3-bets us to 12. I think this is a slam dunk spot to 4-bet. Not only do I already have an aggressive image, which means I might get called more light, but it's a button versus big blind dynamic. You're always going to want to be 4-betting pretty aggressive there, just because the big blind's going to be 3-betting more aggressive. So I go ahead and make it 29, and then the big blind does call. So it heads up to a flop, which is 9-8-3 with 2 diamonds. The big blind goes ahead and checks it over to me, and pretty interesting decision here whether I want to c-bet or not. One of the reasons I would kind of like to not c-bet here is I just don't really think our opponent's going to fold often when we do c-bet. They have a lot of strong hands on this board. I think there's some possibility that as a tight aggressive opponent, they wouldn't always go ahead and 5-bet aces and kings. So I think they actually have all of the overpairs in their range to this board. They could definitely have pocket 8s and pocket 9s. So I think like checking here might be a good option. Having said that though, ace of diamonds, king of spades, basically anything that has the ace of diamonds and king of whatever, is a really good bluff candidate here, just because we're going to be able to put a lot of pressure on going forward, trying to represent the strongest over pairs and potentially the front door flush if a diamond gets in. So I really could go either way here. I think considering everything I've said about my over aggression in this session, I probably will get called down a bit lighter, so I might just be more inclined to take the passive option. I wasn't in that mindset though. I go ahead and c-bet bluff. I go ahead and make it 21, and then the villain does call. So it still adds up to the turn, which is the 4 of spades. Big blind goes ahead and checks it over to me, and I think now, once I bet the flop and I didn't get raised, it's pretty likely that my opponent does have an overpair and not a set on this board. So I actually don't mind continuing to put in aggression here, just because we're going to have aces and kings much more often than the big blind is. So we really can put the pressure on to try and represent a strong hand. But I mean, that's how I would think at a baseline, but considering that we have been so aggressive this session, I think the chances that we get called down lighter are much more likely in this dynamic. So I wouldn't hate if I gave up bluffing here. You guys already know I didn't do that though. I put in the second bullet. I go ahead and make it 28, and the reason I've sized smaller here is just to set up a river shove. If my opponent calls this, they're going to have about 120 left in the pot, will be about 150. So if the river's a diamond, an ace, or a king, I can just rip it all in for value, or as a bluff if it's a diamond, and then my opponent calls. So not loving that news, but we are still heads up to the river. It's an interesting river. It's a queen of diamonds. The big blind goes ahead and checks it over to me, and I think at this point I really just have to go forward with my plan to put max pressure on and go all in. Not only is the diamond a great card for me to represent a flush, but it's also going to be a bit of a scare card if my opponent does have pocket 10s or pocket jacks, because you know they might be concerned I have ace queen, so I can put a lot of pressure on those two hands specifically. And I mean, I've had the whole planned during the course of this session to bluff if the diamond got there, so definitely going to have to go with it now. I rip it all in, then my opponent hits the tank. They're in the tank for probably a good 20 seconds before they end up getting rid of it. So I do think I have been overly aggressive over the course of this session, but this hand in particular, I actually do kind of like that I use the over aggression, and clearly it got my opponent off a big hand because they tanked on the river. So I am actually really stoked with this one. Next hand, I have ace-jack offsuit under the gun. I think this is another hand like the 10-9 where it's sort of borderline whether you open it or not. I decided to open it this time. You already know this hand wouldn't have made the vlog if I didn't. Then we get a 3-bet from the +1 player, and then they get cold called by the +2 player. The action folds back round to me, and I really think the best play here is just to fold the +1 position player. They're going to have ace king, ace queen, and all the overpairs to probably 10s plus. So I'm actually crushed against that range. And then I am getting a better price because the +2 player called, but they're also going to have a super strong range. I'm just crushed by both these ranges. And even though I am getting such a good price, the fact that I'm out of position to 2 people probably just should be folding. I think I make a pretty silly mistake and do decide to call here. Definitely not in love with this call. Regardless, though, we go 3 ways to a flop. Queen 10-7 rainbow. Go ahead and check it over to the pre-flop aggressor. They check it, and then the +2 player checks back as well. So we do get a free turn. It's the 9 of spades. It's a pretty good turn for us. We do have a double gut shot now. We make a straight on either a king or an 8. So very good turn for us. Having said that, though, I still decide to check it over. I don't really think that I'm going to be able to get my opponent to fold very often with a lead here. Any one of these opponents checked a queen on the flop, they're definitely going to call. And because I do have an aggressive table image, I think even like pocket jacks are going to be, pretty tempted to call down as well. So I do decide to go ahead and check it over. Then the pre-flop aggressor actually bets out. They go ahead and make it half pot. The +2 position player folds. The action's back on me here, and I actually think this is a really good spot to check raise as a semi-bluff. When my opponent checks the flop, I really don't think they have a super strong hand like a set. Maybe pocket 9s, but that's a bit unlikely. I think most of their range is either going to be a queen that checked the flop, an overpair that checked a flop, or they're just like randomly stabbing at it with ace king. That's a pretty weak range, so we're definitely going to go ahead and put pressure on them. I go ahead and check raise it to 42.75, and then my opponent folds. So I know the theme of the session has been I'm being too overly aggressive so far, but I think this is actually a really good spot where I did think about it and decide this is a good spot to attack my opponent's weaker range. That's how you should be bluffing. You shouldn't be diverting towards aggressive lines in the first place, which I have been doing in this session, but this is actually a good bluff, so pretty happy with this one. This next hand, I think it's where things really start to come off the rails with the over-aggression. Not pre-flop though, because I have pocket queens under the gun and I just decide to raise. Then the action gets to a loose passive cutoff, it calls, a loose passive button calls as well, and then a loose passive small blind calls, and we go 4 ways to a flop. It is Jack 5-4 rainbow. The big blind checks it over to me, and in this spot, I actually think it's a really good spot to go ahead and check. Obviously, we have to be somewhat concerned that we're behind with 3 other people in the pot. Pretty much all of them can have 6-5 suited, pocket 5s, pocket 6s, and potentially even 6-5 offsuit. I do think these loose passive players are going to be inclined to call with, so we are somewhat concerned that we are behind. But the other benefit of checking is if either of the cutoff of the button does have a strong jack, they're going to go ahead and bet it themselves, which we're very happy for our opponent to go ahead and value bet a worse hand, and we can check it to them and induce bluffs from straight draws, or even if they do have like pocket 8s, then they just want to bet at it for protection. We get bets from those hands by checking. So I go ahead and check, then the cutoff goes ahead and bets half pot. The button calls, the big blind calls, and the action's back on me, and I think in this spot, it's a slam dunk decision to just call. I do think it's pretty likely that the button and the big blind will both slow play if they did have a set here, just because it's such a dry board. I mean, there are straight draws, but at the same time, they don't want to raise and force out all of the jacks. So I really do think they are going to slow play pretty often. So I do have to be somewhat concerned that I am behind here with my queens, and folding obviously off of the table. I don't decide to call though. I actually go ahead and check raise here. My logic is I really don't want to give up the betting lead. I think to get max value from a jack here, check raising is the right decision. I think it's a mistake though, just because I am against 3 different ranges, all of which have stronger hands in their range. So I have to be concerned that I am behind here, and this is just another example of me being too overly aggressive. Just instead of bluffing this time, I'm going too thin for value. So really not in love with this play. If you guys don't think the check raise is actually kind of okay, hop in the comments below and let me know. I just want you guys to know I'm really not happy with it. I think it's a big mistake. Regardless though, I check raise it. The cutoff does fold. The button calls, which are already pretty concerning. The big blind folds as well. So we are somewhat happy that we get heads up, but I still think that the button can have stronger hands in their range. It is somewhat possible that they do have like ace jack, king jack, or a straight draw, so we do beat some of the hands in their range. So when we go to a turn to a hearts, the action's on me. I do want to get value from those weaker hands in their range, so I do go ahead and bet out 39, which I'm kind of in two minds, because I think the check raise on the flop was a big mistake, and it's sort of like, how do you play once you make one pretty silly mistake? You know, it's like betting out here does make sense to get value from like 7-8 or ace jack, but maybe those hands will just fold to more aggression, and then I'm only getting action from stronger hands. So it's kind of a really awkward spot that I put myself in with a very thin check raise. Regardless though, the opponent goes ahead and raises me. They literally min click me, so very concerned that I'm behind one of those two pair or sets. And 5-4, and honestly a loose passive opponent could be calling with 5-4 offsuit. Pre-flop, I'm just behind so many hands in their range, so even though I'm getting such a good price to call a min click, I go ahead and fold it. What are you going to do? Not check raise the flop for thin value multi-way. That's what you're not going to do moving forward. Last hand of the session, and if you thought the last hand was bad, this one's just straight up embarrassing. So the action folds around to a loose passive low jack. They go ahead and limp. Then a tight aggressive hijack opens it up to 4. The action gets to me on the button. Obviously going to 3-bet my queens here, loose table image or not. I make it 12. Then the action gets back to the limper and actually decide to limp call. And then the pre-flop aggressor calls as well. So we go 3 ways to a flop. King 8-7 rainbow. The action checks to me, and I think the best play here is clearly to just check back. I am very concerned that both of the opponents have kings in their range. The limp call specifically, I actually think that like reeks of ace king. They wanted to limp raise ace king pre-flop, but then there was a 3-bet pod and they got kind of scared, but they don't want to fold, so they just called with the ace king pre-flop. Like, I think that makes a world of sense that they have ace king here. They can definitely have a bunch of like weaker pocket pairs as well, but those are just going to fold if I bet, so we can't get value from them. So already concerned about that range. But then the hijacker as well can have pocket 8s, pocket 7s, 7-8 suited. They actually have potential to check raise as a bluff, which is going to put us in a very awkward spot with queens. So I think the best play here clearly is a check back. You guys already know I've been way too over aggressive this session. I do throw in the c-bet. There's some merit to betting out to deny equity to an ace high hand, but in this dynamic I really shouldn't be. I lead out, and then the low jack folds, but the hijack does call. So we still heads up to a turn. That is a beautiful turn. Queen of clubs. We end up luck boxing a set on the turn, which I'm absolutely stoked with. When the action checks to us, we definitely want to go ahead and bet for value. We can build a monster pot against king queen, plus there's a bunch of straight draws or backdoor flushes we can get value from as well. If my opponent didn't 4-bet ace king preflop, I mean pretty unlikely but somewhat possible, we can get value from that as well. So I go ahead and bet 44, and then my opponent calls. So still heads up to the river, which is the ace of spades. The opponent goes ahead and checks it over to me, and I still want to go ahead and bet my set for value. Problem on this river is I think a lot of my opponent's range are going to be kind of put off by this card. They're going to know we have a bunch of ace king in our range, so I really don't even think like king queen is going to call that big a bet. So I go ahead and bet half pot. I think I should probably bet even smaller. I want to bet something like 50 even, just to give a hand like king jack a decent price to call when I think they're always going to fold to this bet. But then my opponent doesn't fold. They go ahead and rip it all in. The action's on me here, and I really think the best play here is just to fold, particularly at the 100 NL level. I really don't think my opponent is turning like a king jack into a bluff here, and I really do think that they have a lot of jack 10s in their range, being that I bet small on the flop when we're really deep stacked, so they can definitely float, and then they turn the open ender, so obviously they're going nowhere when I bet the turn. So I really do think they have all 4 jack 10 suited combos in their range, and I really don't think they're betting a worse hand for value. I think if they have pocket 8s or pocket 7s, that they're probably going to go ahead and check raise on the turn, just because there are so many straight draws and flush draws that they probably don't want to scare card on the river. Hands like ace king, I don't think they're check raising with, so I really am concerned that I'm behind here, and I think the best play is to fold. You guys know I haven't been playing great this session. Usually I'm too overly aggressive. I think I'm too overly passive in this spot, because I do throw in the call. Not in love with this decision, and of course the opponent does show us jack 10 of hearts as I should have expected, and they scooped that pot, and very, very disappointed, not only with my flop bet, paying them off when they obviously had Jack 10, pretty sick spot, and I am actually kicking myself a bit for paying off in this really big pot. There you go, the most 7 interesting hands I did play from the course of today's session. I really do feel like they painted a picture in terms of how I played. Today's gameplay grade, I'm going to give myself a D+. Very disappointed with today's performance. Definitely do think I got overly aggressive, and the reason I feel like I got overly aggressive is just because that first hand with the Queen Jack suited, where I pulled off a pretty big bluff, I think that sort of tilted me and sort of gave me a bit of overconfidence, a bit of arrogance that I really could just run over my opponents and pull these ridiculous bluffs every hand. And I really just got in the mindset of like winning every pot by bluffing. And I really think that is a very substantial leak. We covered a few hands where I did lose big hands because of my over-aggression, but the reason the loss was so big today, I really do think it's just from those hands where I like c-bet and get raised, because everyone knows I'm being so aggressive. They're floating with everything, they're raising with everything, and it's just like I wasn't making any money by c-bet bluffing. I think I should have made the logical adjustment and sort of been betting tighter ranges. The only reason I'm not going worse than a D grade, like the reason I'm not giving myself an F, is because even though I was overly aggressive, in 2 of those hands we did there, I actually did really like the lines I used as a bluff. And when I do sit there and think about it, my opponent has a weak range here for this and this reason, so I can put a lot of pressure on by raising. That's when bluffs work. That's when bluffs are smart. When it's me just c-betting with hands that I shouldn't be c-betting, and me calling off with a set when my opponent obviously has a straight, like those hands, they're just going to wreck what could have been an A+ session. When I do bluff, it needs to be for a good reason, when my opponent likely has a weak hand and I can represent a strong hand, not just because I want to win a pot. So definitely going to have to downgrade my performance to a D+ for today's session, unfortunately. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for sticking to the end of the vlog as always. Really does help the channel's analytics, so I do appreciate it. If you haven't already, please hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment. Roast me for being an absolute aggro fish today. Let me know how I could have played these hands better. Always super keen to have a discourse about these hand histories with everyone out there. I think we all do learn a lot going through these hands. So for now, I'm out of here. Peace.